Hi, welcome to another episode of I Mustache You Something. I am already frustrated with Anthony. We haven't even started recording, and I'm already irritated, and I'm already done listening to him. So it's it's at least comforting to know that there's going to be people listening to me get more frustrated with him over the course of this conversation, which is usually what happens. Welcome, Anthony.
Thank you for the kind introduction, Mina.
So Anthony is recently married. Congratulations.
Thank you.
He has a wonderful partner in life, Jasmine, and it's spelled without an E. It's Jasmin. I learned that the hard way, and I am still looking forward to their wedding reception. And they are one of the couples that uh, was unfortunately affected by the whole COVID thing, um, and I'm so excited for the day to come, so that I can go embarrass him at his wedding instead of virtually as I've been since March. So the reason I'm so irritated with Anthony is because usually before these conversations with people, I'll have them kind of give me a sense of what they want to talk about. And Anthony's like, I don't know, talk about food. And I was like, this is,
Who
this
doesn't
is,
want to talk about food?
I want to eat food, Anthony. I don't want to talk about food, right? The only food I want to talk about is the food I'm going to eat. If I'm not going to eat it, why am I talking about it? So the people listening to this or watching this, if they have any sense at all of what constitutes a reasonable conversation, are going to justifiably complain and say, why are you talking about food? And I'm going to say, I don't know, that's what Anthony wanted. So please, now that we have an audience and they're listening, I'm going to start the conversation. And like I said, there's several different options of things that we can talk about, but you're actually going to have to take a position on one of them. So let's start by, why are you afraid of taking a position? Because I brought up 3 or 4 different things that were legitimate things that I know you think very reasonable, very thoughtful, very deep things about. And you're like, I don't know. But what if someone says that they disagree? Okay. They might be right. You might be wrong. You're wrong a lot. But why not speak your mind?
Yeah, this is what I really appreciate about you, Mina, is that you bring out
Don't talk about me and what you appreciate about me. I don't want to hear about me, and I don't want to hear about what you appreciate. Enough with the pleasantries
you
and the
want me to be
niceties, and
fake.
tell me why you don't want to take a position.
Probably has to do with the vulnerability component. And I generally like to hide in my thoughts and share them in one-on-one discussions. So I think we might be getting somewhere with one of my insecurities here.
Okay, it's not a therapy session. This is not for your benefit. It's for everyone else's benefit. Okay, so again, what is is the is the reason that that I think that you have something valuable to say, right? And you say, no, I'm not going to share it with all these people, right? You can share it with me and you can tell me, but the second it's going to go public and someone else is going to listen, you start second guessing yourself and you start saying, mm, I don't know if it's a good enough opinion to share with more than just one person. And this insecurity thing, I don't buy. And I like Mary hopefully, and I've already said this on like previous recordings, I'm like 99.9% confident she won't listen to this. So I'm safe that I'm not going to
I'll
get
make
yelled
sure
at by
she
her.
listens to it.
What's that?
I said I'll make sure she listens to it. I'll highly
Oh, just
recommend
so
it.
she can feel bad for you?
I
She
don't know
actually
who's
would
going
do
to
that.
watch this.
She loves you enough that if you asked her, she would listen to it. But there's other people like in the mental health field and in like compassionate fields that are like cringing now. They're like, he's opening up. He's being vulnerable about his vulnerability, and you're just shutting him down. I can't believe you did that. Like that's so uncompassionate. Like, okay, but there's a understanding that you and I have that I know that you're stronger than you let on. So it's not just you're not insecure about the idea. What is the actual issue?
You know, it might be offending others with my position. And so it's this mentality with our culture of trying to keep the peace. And I grew up just having the like sort of situation. And so being اتفضل
لا
اتفضل
لا تفضل لا انت تفضل
من فضلك من
لا لا
فضلك
لا 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 تفضل تفضل
لا 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 لا
لا لا لا لا لا انت تفضل.
So anyways, with that, you I grew up thinking like, hey, let me keep my opinion to myself. I can look at the world and form opinions, but I don't have to, for lack of a better term, impose them on others or upset others. And so I'll craft my opinion and live with that and keep the peace, which may have been a false reality.
So where does this come from? Where is this something that is unique to you, or do you think that's generalized in our community?
You said this wasn't a therapy session.
That's a legitimate question.
No, I think it's
I'm not asking about your childhood. This isn't like Freudian psychology of like, oh, what's your relationship with your mother? No, I'm just asking, is it you? Are you like by yourself like this? Or are there other people like you?
yeah, I
Because
find
clearly I'm like I don't have this problem.
yeah,
Like
something clicked. Well, this isn't a I don't know. But anyways, yeah, with regards to that topic, um, I think it is something in the community, and recently learned something that seemed novel to me, but I constantly say we, or like we do this, we do that. But I realized recently the power of I, and that it's not necessarily that you are speaking about how great you are or whatever it may be misperceived as, but rather that you have a voice and that that voice is important. And that's helped me at work. It's helped me in a lot of places, and I continue to try to learn how I can find my voice more. And I hope that our culture starts to encourage that, or at least what I've encountered with our culture.
so we'll get back to that because I think some people would push back on that and you know find it as like a deviant form of egomania. Like, oh, what do you mean I? You know, Saint Paul says, "Not I, but Christ." And you know, I've been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. And who are you to say that you're going to say? And like, we should default to we, and we shouldn't say I. We'll get back to that in a second, but because I know when you know people are listening to this like you know like there's different ears and there's different perspectives, so I just want to make sure that like we don't get locked into like a certain perspective of looking at things without honoring different perspectives, right? But the the underlying problem, where do you think it comes from? Or sorry, without framing necessarily as a problem, but if you're saying that it's not just you, that it's in our community, and we tend to shy away from sharing our perspective, right? And we just kind of keep it close to the vest. And it's like, oh, I don't want to offend someone if I say this and they disagree with it, right? Why? Where does that come from?
Some initial thoughts. I mean, I think it might be a lack of education about some of the critical components, like humility, for example. What does humility actually mean? Is it that we shouldn't talk and share our opinions when appropriate, or is there another definition there, such as like the approach that Christ might take, or something that brings us closer to Christ? That's the main thing I think that comes to mind, is growing up constantly we're told, I reflected on humility, and we see examples of how others may approach it through our culture. And so, yeah, that's probably the main piece for me. And I didn't start realizing some of that until seeing some of the work culture and other things.
And if we were to understand humility properly, how would you frame it?
The definition that I've connected with the most has been something that brings the community closer to Christ, like approaching situations from that lens.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's similar. Like C.S. Lewis says, humility is not thinking less of yourself; it's thinking of yourself less, right? So that going out from yourself, and I like how you framed it, because I think I never considered this aspect of C.S. Lewis and his perspective on it, but it's incomplete, right? Because it's clever and it's a play on words, but it tells you what not to think about, but it doesn't tell you what to think about. So I actually like your answer better, in that, yes, you're thinking less of yourself, but you're also thinking about the community, and you're thinking about how that community comes closer to Christ. So I think that's a powerful addition to what C.S. Lewis said. Okay, so am I gathering that you think that we're more likely to think of humility as thinking of yourself less, as a group, as a culture?
Yeah.
Okay, and how does that manifest itself, and how does that translate into how we relate to each other?
I think a big part of it is, when I say I think of myself less, I may think of myself as having no voice at all, or if I speak, that may harm my neighbor. And so it's this constant, I don't know, it's a cycle in a sense, where you start saying, you start with, like, I'm not going to talk at all. My ideas don't matter. What the person in power says matters most, in terms of the hierarchical framework. And I just don't want to test the prevalent opinion or those in power.
So you're bringing a new element. So what is that? How does that relate? Like the hierarchy and the perception that there's already an answer, and challenging that answer is going to be something that is going to be problematic for you and for the hierarchy and for the community around you. Like, That's a new element that you're introducing now.
Yeah, I've appreciated some of the previous episodes about asking questions, and the the intent can be misperceived, or certain questions can be perceived as a threat at times. And so as to not stir the pot with certain topics, like that, I've found myself quiet in that realm as well. I don't know if I'm getting at what you're asking.
So you're treading lightly and you're being very cautious and diplomatic, which I appreciate on some level. But um, I guess one way to look at it this is by looking at the negative, look at the inverse, right? So to address that concern, right, about okay, well, what if you do cause harm, right? What if questions are harmful? What if you are disrespectful, right? What if you do put yourself in a position where you're not just offering your opinion, but you are causing problems, right? How would that look, right? Because I don't think it's a completely ridiculous concern, right? I don't think it's something that couldn't happen, right? But what would that look like for someone to offer their opinion, but do so not in a humble manner, as we'll potentially get to? Because I think what you're trying to do is to define speaking your mind with humility, right? How to do that, right? And because we haven't been taught to do that, we've just been taught, no, speaking your mind is not humble. Being quiet and saying hadir, that's humble, right? So before we find the middle, let's find the other extreme. What does the other extreme look like where it would be problematic? You're bringing up a concern, you're bringing up a question, and you're doing it in kind of like a problematic way.
Yeah, uh, I think you're getting at kind of the public shaming or malicious intent of some questions, where it may be more wise to have certain discussions one-on-one, especially if there's something you're challenging, or that may be more sensitive, and you may be able to dive deeper into that topic if approaching the person, and it may even be better for the community, back to that, if speaking on some of those topics, but in private, versus trying to make a reality show of certain topics or people.
Okay. So you mentioned intent or malintent, right? Is it possible to judge someone's intent? Someone else's, I mean.
My short answer is no. uh, Rather, like, focusing on my intent when I'm asking questions or saying certain things is where I try to land.
And I mentioned this in my conversation with my friend Mira Riyad. It's not posted yet, um, at least at the time of this recording. But keep an eye out for that one because she pushes back on that question of can you judge intent? And Mira's, I mean, from an honesty and an integrity standpoint, in terms of like, really cutting to the heart of a matter. She has a lot to say, and she has a depth of thought that I appreciate. And she questions that, but by and large, for the most part, I lean in your direction. Like I get her perspective on how it is possible to judge intent in certain cases, but I lean in your direction where I'm uncomfortable judging intent. But you mention your own intent, right? When you ask questions and when you bring up something, right, you do judge your own intent. How does that feel, and how does that work in your head?
Yeah, it depends on if I'm courageous enough to actually reflect on my own intent. um, but yeah, generally, it's probably something where, are you talking about the approach I use to gauge my own or judge my own
Yeah,
intent?
like you're feeling compelled to say something, do something, ask something, what have you, right? And you recognize, okay, um, I don't want to fall into this default setting of being quiet and being submissive and being quote unquote obedient. Um, but I also don't want to be problematic about it. And you identified malintent as being one of the ways to be problematic, right? To like cause a scandal or like, create problems or what have you. And you say, okay, well, I'm not trying to do that, right? How do you find that middle? How do you find yourself coming back to saying, no, no, like I've considered this and thought this through. And as best as I can determine for myself, I have the best intentions. How do you do that? What is that process?
Yeah, it's kind of mixing in my head with the process of should I speak or not. Um, and I think it goes back to being a kid and being told like, hey, take 5 seconds or 10 seconds before you say something to think through if this is the right thing to do or not. Because a lot of times when I speak too quickly, I'm like, ah, I shouldn't have said that or whatever. Um, I think a lot of it is how I'm feeling. Like if I feel that um, with the reflection of why I'm asking the question or saying the thing, is this actually adding to the discussion? Um, is it hopefully going to bring the group in a positive direction? Does it need to be said? Like, were things said that I need to speak up about, that I feel like it's worth taking a position on and having that courage to speak up on? So I think those are some of the things I think about, but mostly the first 5 to 10 second rule.
And if you come up with all reasonable answers where it's like, nope, this is adding meaning. No, like this is something that needs to be said. Nope, this is something that, if I don't say it, it's doesn't look like it's going to be said otherwise. I paused 5, 10 seconds, days, weeks, like whatever it is. This really needs to be said. And then the only thing left is that it's A, countercultural, or B, might be perceived as a lack of humility. Do you speak up?
Yeah, I think you do because doing what's right uh, takes courage at times. So I think even if it's perceived as malintent, again, I think there are a few more components. Like, is it the right setting to speak up in? Um, like we were talking about earlier, like the whole, I want to make a reality show out of this situation, or are we actually making progress? And also my own emotional state. So I might be angry about other things that happened and may not be able to block that out at the time. And so, regardless of what checklist of things I go through in my head, I'm still going to cause uh, potentially trouble by saying this. But even that rule doesn't apply if things need to be said. Uh, and you may miss your moment to speak up. Uh, I think, yeah, I can't speak for every situation, but I think the general mindset is what I use.
So, having said all that, I'm not going to bring up the topics that you didn't want to talk about. But those topics where I said, okay, I know you have opinions about X, Y, and Z. One of the concerns that you had, and you said, no, I don't want to talk about it because someone else might get upset. And you mentioned that earlier in our conversation. It's actually recorded, right? So if if you're saying something with good intentions and you've thought it through, and you're not trying to be a problem, you're not trying to be dramatic, you're not trying to blame or shame or anything, like you're just bringing something into open conversation to say, hey, you know, I have an opinion on this. Why not bring it up? Because you had some reservations and you said, oh, because someone might be upset.
Yeah, and maybe this is a follow-on discussion to the can you judge others' intent, but another piece is can you judge others' ears? Like, are people ready to listen to that perspective all the time? And so that's something I like. I think timing of certain topics is important, but to answer your question, yes, with the right approach, I don't see anything wrong with sharing an opinion and having a voice. And so perhaps I've convinced myself through this discussion, or maybe you've convinced me.
Me, little old me. I'm just asking questions.
They're good ones, but you don't like pleasantries, so I'll stop it with that.
So this is not a trivial question, right? This is not like something that has a simple answer, right? And that's why I'm pressing you on it, because if it were simple, it wouldn't be worth discussing, right? If the answer is always speak up and just M7 like just whatever, then there wouldn't be any nuance, right? Mm-hmm. Because you do bring a very valid concern where, you know, preparing your heart, preparing your mind, being prayerful about it, and you know, asking if this is the will of the Holy Spirit to present this idea. Considering the ears of the other person, I think, is an excellent point that you brought. You know, is this the right time? Is this the right place? Is this the right forum? Are they prepared to hear this? Those are all things very valid, very, very reasonable to consider. But the question still remains, having considered all of these, what stops you from saying something when you say, I've already considered all of these things, and as best as I can discern, this is the right thing with the right message at the right time with the right audience in the right place, and you still don't share? Why?
Yeah, the two things that come to mind are courage and confidence in myself and what I'm saying. So, I mean, that's the short answer. Is that
What are you afraid of then?
That's probably something I'll reflect on when I get home. Although we're all home, quarantine 2020. But what
so
am
reflect
I?
With me. Reflect with me, because I think a lot of things that are coming up in these conversations with people are driven by fear. We're afraid of this. Like, we feel that we don't have freedoms because our parents were afraid of that. We make certain decisions as a community because our leadership is afraid of X. We as individuals don't speak up and don't say what we have to say, again, in a respectful, thoughtful, compassionate, timely, you know, well considered in terms of the venue, but we still don't say something because we're afraid. What are we afraid of?
I think you stumped me. No, but perhaps it's like a perspective of going back to my personal problems, but wanting to be liked could be a piece of it. So if you're more neutral, you appeal to the masses, or so, or you think you do. But again, well, what's the point of that if you're not driving forward? You know, however you may define that. And then probably being not wanting confrontation, or even perhaps confidence in the idea itself. So you're seeing me stutter a lot. And so personally, if I haven't thought through something and read every book that I think was published, or paper, or done at least a little bit of research on what I'm saying, I hesitate a lot in sharing ideas. So that's another piece.
So bringing up a controversial idea may make you disliked. Bringing up a incomplete idea might make you disrespected. So if you are too correct and too strong, it's bad. And if you're not correct enough and too weak, that's bad.
So you become a turtle.
Because nothing you can say is valid anymore, right? You're either too strong in your opinion because it's like, oh, that guy, I hate that guy. Or it's, oh, that guy's so stupid. That guy doesn't know anything, right? Okay, but like, is there something in the middle where I've thought this well enough that I have something maybe reasonable to contribute, but not so much that it's overbearing? And we, have to strike this like, cosmic balance between دمه خفيف but like جدع شوية. Like I think I I don't have either of these. I'm just gonna say what I think, right? Now I've accepted that people think I am not a nice person. And I've accepted that people think that I don't know anything. Both of those are totally fine, right? People think Anthony Zaki, what a nice guy. He's so sweet. You have something to lose, right? Oh, Anthony, he's so smart. Every time he says something, man, I really love what he says. You have something to lose, right? And if you say something that alienates one of these audiences, you feel like maybe you've lessened yourself. Yes?
Yeah, but as you say that, and maybe a reason I've connected with you over the years is the fact that I aspire to be able to understand the confidence and courage you have. But on that same note, those 2 points that you made need like an evolution of thought in that, like, what is it? Who are you as a person? If and I'm speaking to myself, if you can't like take a position or have the courage to share an idea, it's hard to drive change or move forward as a community in certain aspects. If certain people don't take that leadership position, have that courage and confidence to share their true thoughts. So,
and once you have shared the thought, after we're done with the catastrophization of like, I'm gonna get excommunicated and they're gonna think that I'm whatever label we consider to be the worst possible label. Oh, he's too this, right? And out you go, right? Or just not nice. That's just not nice. Like, why would you say that? Nice people don't say things like that. Like if you were respectful, obedient, if you were a good son of the church, you wouldn't have said that. If you were a good daughter of the church, you wouldn't have questioned this. Yeah. So now that you've said it without catastrophizing, right? And without saying like, it's going to be the end of the world if I bring this up. What actually happens? Most of the time when you bring something up, what actually happens? Is it really met with this that you're expecting?
Yeah, I think
what is the actual result of speaking and saying something?
not much. Generally, good, fruitful dialogue and understanding other people's perspectives.
And if you're right and you have a good point to be made, what happens? Most of the time, with most reasonable people, what happens?
Yeah, people say that's a good point. Let's do that or this.
Or maybe that's a good point. Maybe we can't do it this way right now, but let's come back to it. And there's some progress, there's some nudging in that direction. And if what you're truly saying is as foolish and unseasoned and uneducated as you had feared before you shared it, right? And as long as you come with like, listen, I was thinking maybe blah, blah, blah. And someone says, oh, I read 17 books on this and I wrote 3 of them and blah, 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 right? What happens then?
Then you listen to their opinion and continue the dialogue.
So whether you're right or you're wrong, you have something to add or not, you've added meaning, right? You've added meaning to the pool of meaning either for yourself or for others. So let's review. You have good ideas that I love, that you don't share because of humility.
Because of everything I shared in this.
Because of humility. It's not actual humility, it's humility. And this humility prevents you from actually even daring to say something. Even though you're not being this extreme, like, oh, like, I'm just going to say whatever I want to whoever I want, however I want, whenever I want. No, like, okay, I'm going to be prayerful, I'm going to be thoughtful, I'm going to be considerate. I have something maybe a little bit to contribute. And you don't say it because you're afraid that it would either be rejected as silly or you will be rejected as overbearing. So now it brings us to the time where I must ask you something. Do you feel more encouraged to speak up?
I do.
What would you say to someone that might be listening to this that shares the same very real, very human, very compassionate, thoughtful reservations that you have about speaking their mind? What would you say to this person?
First off, I'd say I'm amazed that you're still listening. But the second, thing I'd say is to reflect on your voice and try saying, I believe this, and I think that in group settings and with other people and see what happens. That's been my experience recently, where I've found my voice in terms of taking a position on things, more specifically at work recently. And that's given, and I've had mentors that have helped me try to work through that. And I think that's given me a new satisfaction with life, myself, and so on. So that's what I'd say.
And in doing this at work, have you come across any challenges? Like in this setting where you're trying out this new voice? Has that worked out? Have you hit some roadblocks? Is it still too early to tell?
I think it goes back to the intent thing that we started with, where if I am trying to add something that's not much of an addition, it's taken that way. When I've thought through something and have gone through what we discussed, it's been met with appreciation, respect, and I think people appreciate the fact that you're willing to take a stand on something, and you're able to defend that thought too, generally a lot. So.
And what about this concept of potentially, theoretically, quote unquote, difficult people? What can you tell me about them?
Yeah, so I didn't come up with this. I'll caveat that, but luckily I have the pleasure of speaking with people that I can steal stuff from. So anyways, this whole concept of difficult people, I recently asked a mentor about, and they were saying it's all about listening to others and actively listening and caring about the individual. Because a lot of times people might come off as difficult or having an ego, arrogant, whatever you want to say. But perhaps they just want to be heard. Perhaps they want to be understood. And when you as an individual can reflect back that you're listening, not only through active listening or saying what they're saying in a different way, but also showing that you truly understand the core of their need, and can appreciate that, then perhaps the concept of difficult people can be toned down, and people may not come off as difficult, or you may not think of them as difficult at all. So that really resonated with me. This person also said that working on the relationship is important with certain people, and so with everyone, but especially if you're finding that someone might come off as difficult initially, investing in that relationship is worthwhile.
So how does one invest in a relationship?
In terms of the concept of all progressing as a community or towards one goal at work or whatever it may be, if that person is celebrating something, you celebrate with them. If that person may need help with something, showing that you're there. So those sorts of things I think are investments.
And do you feel like that comes first, or being vulnerable enough to share an idea about something difficult, or does it not matter?
You're saying the listening first or the sharing or something else?
You mentioned several things. You mentioned the listening, you've mentioned doing things together, celebrating together, engaging together. And one of the central threads in our conversation is, having a safe environment where you can share your thoughts, right? So my question is, does one of those things come first? Or do they all happen at the same time? Like where do we start?
Yeah, I'm leaning towards the active listening component while working on the relationship, of course, and keeping that in mind. But first the listening, because if I'm talking and every time I talk, and I'm a difficult person, and you keep interrupting me and you don't care to hear anything I'm saying, then why will I care when you congratulate me on a victory if my voice has been muted? So I'd lean towards the listening and caring about the individual.
That's very sage, my friend.
I don't understand what that means.
Very wise. So thank you, Anthony. You're the briefest of my guests so far. That's not surprising. But that being said, I think this is the most I've gotten you to talk in the 6 years I've known you. You will go back to being a mute and a recluse after this. Maybe we'll have a series devoted to food and you'll have more to say.
That'll be the one. We'll talk for hours.
Can I ask you to lean in and show me your mustache so I can post this as a picture? Smile. Okay, so I'm gonna use that as a I don't know, like one of those like cover photos or whatever. I'm still figuring out all the technical logistics of how to do this, but I appreciate you coming on and being my guest and sharing with us your wisdom. Any closing thoughts?
Find your voice, take some risks is what I'd say, and keep. I'm done.
حبيبي find your voice and take some risks. قول حاجة يا ابني.
اتفضل.
قول حاجة يا ابني انت.
Those are the two things I'd say. Take some risks, find your voice, and keep exploring this concept of I have a voice, my voice is important. I can have a humble approach while still sharing my opinion, and even if I'm wrong, who cares? But thank you so much for having me, Mina, and always a pleasure talking to you.
Love you, man.
Love you too.
And thank you guys for listening.